Okay, Christopher Peaks back here today with my wingman Brandon Moseley for a special segment of our BCS.State of Alabama podcast. And we have Brent Woodall here with us. Brent is currently assistant district attorney in Colbert County, formerly worked for the AG's office and was Chip Beaker's chief of staff on the PSC. In 2022, he ran for PSC, making it to the runoff against Jeremy Oden before being nipped in a very close contested race. Brent, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. I hope y'all are doing well also this evening.
Good, good. So Brent, let me ask you, man, starting off, last time you brought to forefront to the voters about a hidden tax that was put on them by the PSC. Can you explain that again?
Sure, I'll be glad to. And just to let your viewers know, this is something that I learned during the time that I worked at the PSC as a chief of staff for one of the commissioners, as you mentioned. And it's something that bothered me greatly as a conservative. And that's why 3 years ago now, before next year, when this thing is in full blast, that I made it the center point of my campaign. But it's actually, I don't mind telling you, the last time I ran, at some point, there was somebody from the PSC who said that I was, and I'm being generous here, that I was misleading people by saying this. And so I started in my speeches to say, okay, they say that I'm misleading you. Let me just quote you the statute. And this is from section 29-11-1 of the Code of Alabama. I must say, an attorney got paid very well to come up with this language. It starts out in section A, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary. Now listen to this, the next segment of this. It says, in order to provide for an increase in receipts into the state general fund for the funding of the operations of state government. Somebody, like I said, a lawyer got paid a lot of money to come up with that phrase. Instead of saying taxes, it says in order to provide for an increase in receipts into the state general fund. Well, what goes in the state general fund? We all know taxes. They're trying to increase those taxes. And then they say, they clarify that, say for the funding of the operations of state government. Following all that language in subsection A, there is a list of entities of state agencies that send their money to the state general fund. Number 9 is the Public Service Commission. The important part to me in all of this that people need to understand is that the Public Service Commission does not get any money from the state general fund. It gets its money from the utility companies that it regulates. They pay to the PSC for the privilege of being regulated. And I guess that's the best way of putting it. But they get their money, of course, from their customers, from their ratepayers. And so people are getting their utility bills in the mailbox. They sit down, they write out a check. They may go by the office and pay it in cash, but they think they're paying their utility bill, and they are. But also, as part of what they are paying is this hidden tax that they don't know about. And that to me is very troubling and something that we need to get rid of. And that's one of the things that I intend to do as a Public Service Commission commissioner.
Well, last time in your race, Commissioner Oden wrote several campaign laws while running against you. Do you think he should be disqualified from running again?
Well, I'll leave that up to the people in Montgomery who have oversight authority in that area. But I will not use, I mean, you know this, and Brandon, you know this, I'm sitting in an office that I have rented from someone because I'm not going to use my government office to do an interview for political purposes. I wouldn't take my photograph in a government office for political purposes. I know that he did some things of that nature. It's wrong, shouldn't have been done. But as far as any action that's going to be taken against him, again, I'm just going to leave that up to the people who have oversight in Montgomery of that.
Mr. Woodall.
Yes, sir.
Last time you ran 4 years ago, the big issue was the rates. we had fuel prices about $80 a barrel. And it was costing more money to make power, than it had traditionally. Now oil's down to $18, a barrel, and natural gas is just not that far down, but it's not what it was. Does
Right.
this take away some of the impetus? I mean, having Trump in there is obviously huge,
Yeah.
away from some of the public's, concerns about their power, power and natural gas rates.
Well, I really don't think it should, as far as just how energy is produced. The one thing that I will say along those lines is one of the things that my opponent likes to say, or liked to say a few years ago, as well as other members of the PSC when they're out campaigning, is they talk about how they support coal and they were fighting Biden. Well, Joe Biden didn't have a clue that they were in Montgomery supposedly fighting him. They don't fight Biden. But as far as the production of energy, I don't think it's really going to have that much of an impact as to how the power companies, produce energy, according to what the PSC allows them to do, or blesses their efforts.
Well, Mr. Woodall, here in Montgomery County, we're having literally thousands of acres of what was farmland or pasture land turned into solar farms. Um, it's kind of interesting to see land taken out of agriculture and put into, just solar panels out the wazoo.
Right.
How much more of that do you think we're going to see?
Well, that, I guess, of course, depends on what the price of oil does in the future. I will say this, there are cloudy days in Alabama. There are a lot of times when solar panels are not going to be producing energy, and that's something that we have to keep in the back of our minds when we're starting to go down those venues for energy production. But again, that's just going to be, to me, more of a market-driven issue, and we'll just see what the fluctuation in prices for other means of producing energy will do. I will say this: one of the things that I like to point out when I'm talking to groups around the state is in relates to solar energy, and that is this: the connectivity fee that exists in Alabama. If you decide you're going to go off grid and you're going to have your own solar panels to produce energy, but you still want the ability to get energy, electricity from the grid, should you have a cloudy day, there is a connectivity fee that's associated with that. And our connectivity fee is a whole lot higher in Alabama than it is in some of our adjoining states. That's a disparity there that to me just cannot be justified. And that's something else that I intend to take a really close look at once I'm in that office.
I believe what somebody is, they put a tax on solar panels almost so much that people can't even, it's not even productive for them to even go to solar panels now.
Yeah, it's prohibitive, really, to do that, as long as you are still connected to the grid for a backup source.
Now, we've seen that the Public Service Commission in Alabama, we have a 13% rate of equity, or rate of return, I think is what it is, where the rest of the nation has around 6.5%. Do you know how they went about coming up with this formula to double charge Alabama as opposed to their sister companies, Georgia Power, Mississippi, Florida?
I don't know how they did that internally. I've been gone, as you're aware, from the PSC for a few years now. But I will tell you this: I find it interesting whenever one of the commissioners is asked about this on the campaign trail, or just speaking to a group about how much electricity costs in Alabama. Their response is always, "Well, it gets hot in Alabama." Well, yeah, it does, but it also gets hot in Georgia. It gets hot in Mississippi, and our utility bills should not be that much more than our adjoining states. And we're talking about electricity, but you know, there are other entities that they regulate and they have oversight of that, and they get money from for that privilege again of being regulated by the PSC. But I don't know how they justify that. That'd be a question you'd have to ask my opponent or another one of the commissioners there. I'd be interested to know what their answer is about that.
Mr. Woodall, we've looked at, adding nuclear, we've debated the windmills, the solar panels, and, bringing back coal, all these other power sources. Is there a point where we just have to kind of reach out to Alabama citizens and businesses and schools and other deals and say, maybe some of the onus needs to be on y'all to conserve? Maybe cap the, I don't know if you want to do this by force, or maybe just tell the public, if you'd set your thermostat at 66 in the winter and maybe 78 in the summer, you'd save an awful lot of money on that power bill.
They would. That reminds me of the days of Jimmy Carter, I must tell you, Brandon. I remember those days well. But that again, I mean, those are individual choices that people in Alabama can make. And I would like to point out that what we're talking about, the utility companies that pay into the PSC, I think it's a good opportunity to do that. It's not every utility company that pays into the PSC. The Public Service Commission doesn't, of course, have oversight of TVA or municipally owned utility companies or co-ops. They have oversight, and this is how the PSC likes to say this, of for-profit companies that operate in a certain geographical area without competition. And that's another lawyer way of saying a monopoly, right? But people have the ability to control, as you mentioned, their thermostat. They can set it. They have some leeway, some control over what their power bill is going to be. The problem that they don't have is they don't have control over this hidden tax. And that is one area that, again, to me, the primary thing that needs to be addressed at the Public Service Commission. But that's really in the hands of individuals around the state. And I know there are some people who, keep their thermostats set higher. As I get older, I can tell you my thermostat, I'd like to have my thermostat set a little higher, keep it a little warmer, but that's a choice that they can make. I would be completely opposed to doing what Carter did. And his was just a recommendation, but coming out and telling people that they have to set their temperatures at a certain level, either in the winter or in the summer. I would be opposed to that completely.
Mr. Woodall, and you may not know the answer to this question, but there's I think, I don't know if it's a connect fee or if it's pay your bill or something. They charge $5 in Alabama and $10 in Georgia. I can't remember which that bill is. And then like the Alabama Power, their profit rates is 38% higher than Georgia. Do you know how they're able to do that when they're all up under the Southern Company?
Well, you got a different version of the Public Service Commission in Georgia than you have in Alabama. I mean, to be short, but I would go. I think I may have misheard you, but it's actually, I think what you were talking about is there are things that are actually double price here in Alabama as compared to Georgia.
Correct.
I think that's what you were pointing out, but again, you just have to look at our Public Service Commission. That's one of the things that a commissioner needs to look at before casting any votes. Something else I need to look at, I'll just put it this way, they need to look at their own annual reports. I would encourage anybody watching this to pull up the annual report from the last few years at the Public Service Commission. And I'm just going to go back 4 years. You go back and you look at the annual reports from 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. In 2021, the Public Service Commission transferred, again, this is the hidden tax I'm talking about, that accounted for $10 million in 2021. that came into the Public Service Commission after originating in those utility bills being paid by these consumers across those parts of Alabama serviced by those utilities. $10 million. The very next year in 2022, the same amount of money, $10 million, went from those people paying their utility bills into the general fund. In 2023, it went down to $7 million. And in 2024, it went down to $6 million. That's still too much money. And as I tell people, you figure this money is going to be used on some projects in parts of Alabama that the people who paid it are never going to see, or they're never going to enjoy. That's something that we need to rectify. And I intend to do that when I'm a commissioner there.
But aren't taxes just the cost of having a civilization? I mean, there's taxes when I go to the grocery store, there's taxes when I go through the window at McDonald's, that there's a tax on the utility bills, and that the state general fund gets a percent of everyone's utility bills. Is that really an issue that you think is going to play well with voters?
It should, because when I go to McDonald's, I know I'm going to be taxed. If I go to Walmart, I know I'm going to be taxed. But when I'm paying my utility bill, I'm not expected to be taxed. There are some other state agencies on this list where you got to say, okay, they probably knew that, like the Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. Well, if you go to an ABC store, you're expected to be taxed. But let's face it, when people are being hit after a cold spell and their energy prices have skyrocketed for a month or so, and that happened up here in Colbert County where I live. Now I'm on a municipally owned utility, so it doesn't affect me, but it does affect people who are on one of the utilities regulated by the Public Service Commission. But there is an expectation in some aspects of our life and a knowledge that we are being taxed. But in this case, there is no knowledge of it because people don't know about it. And there certainly is not an expectation. I'll tell you this, and Brandon, this is going back 3 years ago in the last campaign. The first time my opponent heard me speak was in Double Springs at some event. He came up to me after I spoke, and this is what he said. He said, what's this tax this is a verbatim quote. He said, what's this tax you're talking about? We don't tax nobody. And I looked at him then and I said, you've been there for 10 years. You ought to know about it. I mean, I was there for 3.5, something like that. And I learned all about it. But even a commissioner who had been there for a decade did not know about this. And so I don't think the average ratepayer of the utility companies knows about that. And a lot of that, I want to follow up and keep going with that about what I just said about my opponent. When he said that 3 years ago, one of the things that I knew was that several months before that meeting in Double Springs, he had been at Larry's. There's a great gun store called Larry's West. It's right off 565 between Madison and Interstate 65. And on a Saturday afternoon, he was at Larry's West. He ran into a couple of friends of mine, and they had known him for several years. One of them said to him, and I had the friend he said this to actually confirm this for me, but the friend asked him, he said, how are things at the PSC? And here's what my opponent said back. He said, this is, again, verbatim quote, there's nothing going on there. The PSC doesn't do anything. You got to be there and do your job. Can you imagine if Elon Musk had his questionnaire sent to state employees and state elected officials in Alabama and got back a response like this? Like, one of the questions is something like, what did you do last week at your agency? And an elected official replied, nothing goes on there. It doesn't do anything. Well, Elon Musk would say, if it were a federal employee, you fired. That's what a state elected official who had been in office for 10 years said at that time. I'm not going to be laid up in Eva, Alabama on the couch watching The Price is Right once I'm elected. I'm going to be in Montgomery at the Public Service Commission doing the job that the people of this state elected me to do. I'm going to know about what goes on there. And when something is wrong, I'm going to work to fix it.
Mr. Wall, talking about the budget a while ago, you said you mentioned something about their annual reports. Does that factor in, and maybe you can, Elon would like to have a go at this, their trips to like New Orleans and Salt Lake City and Miami, where they go to these junkets and sit on the beach for 3 days and go to a meeting and it's paid for by you, the taxpayer?
Mr. Peaks, I would venture to guess that if you were to ask one of the commissioners who goes on those trips, of that question, they would say, well, that doesn't come out of the state of Alabama. That comes out of the organization who we're a member of. I would then follow that up with, don't you pay to the organization to be a member of it so that the Public Service Commission is represented in that organization? So where's the money really coming from? But again, I mean, this is one of, and I know what you're talking about, is my opponent has taken those trips, and they don't go to, Slidell, Louisiana. They're going to Las Vegas, or they're going to Miami. They're going to nice areas, nice cities. And it's more of a junket than it is anything else. And again, I'm going to be somewhere in Alabama rather than, again, Las Vegas or Miami or wherever he's taken these nice trips at. But that just shows complete lack to me. The idea that you don't know what's going on at your agency, but you're willing to travel around the country and live it high on the hog for a while is just ridiculous. As I like to say, the only rhino we need in Montgomery is the one at the zoo. And we need to get that rhino out of Montgomery, and we can do it by electing Brent Woodall to the Public Service Commission next year.
I know the legislature, in recent years has added a few more responsibilities to the PSC. I think there was a constitutional amendment 2 or 4 years ago, where the Lakeview sewer system, and there was now under the oversight of the Public Service Commission. I believe there's a similar amendment for like Shelby County sewers. Is the PSC equipped to oversee sewers and that sort of deal?
Well, it's interesting, Mr. Moseley. There are a lot of things that the Public Service Commission does that some people may not know about. Like even they get into some taxi services oversight in the state of Alabama. The answer to your question is this: there is a difference between the elected officials and the staff that they have that report to them and the merit system employees. During the time that I was there, I found that the merit system employees of the Public Service Commission were fantastic, hardworking, dedicated people who get the job done. Sometimes, the job does seem just a little bit, too much, but they still got it done. They knew what was going on. They could answer questions when you talked about issues. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for those merit systems employees I had the privilege of interacting with while I was there.
Well, when you talked about this hidden tax and the rate they have on us, when the price of fuel goes up, does that not increase the amount of revenue or hidden tax that's on the individual tax ratepayer?
Well, here's what happens. And there's another statute that covers this. This is 37-4-23 of the Code of Alabama. And it actually sets out how much these companies that pay into the Public Service Commission have to pay. And it's based on let me make sure I get the language right here. It is based on their gross receipts. It starts out, I'll quote this for you: a fee of $2.85 per $1,000 for the first $100,000 or less of such gross receipts. Then it goes down to $2.35, then down to $1.85. And there's just this little scale here. But what happens even with what they pay into the Public Service Commission, the Public Service Commission gets all of that money, it pays all of its bills. Then at the end of the fiscal year, it has monies left over. And that's where they get the money to send over to the general fund. That's how this actually works. So the money is going into the Public Service Commission. They use it to pay all of their operating costs, the payroll, any kind of expenses that they have. But they accrue more than they need every year. And instead of that money going back to the utility companies with direction that's a directive that says return this to your ratepayers, it goes over to the general fund, where it gets, as I say, it gets mixed up, mingled up, mashed up with all the other tax money, we'll just say that with all the legitimately collected tax money that's in the open, and it gets spent on those projects that these people may never get to enjoy.
I know, this wasn't directed to you, but Robin Lydecker has run, 2 or 3 times for PSC. And
Yes.
she has been attacked, even though she's been outspent by her opponents, for taking liberal environmentalist money from out of state. And we won't discuss whether that's true or not. Are you concerned that, your opponent, the opposition, will attack where you get your money from? And how do you guard against that?
Well, let me tell you what they did to me last time. I was endorsed by a group called Conservative Party Alabama. I also won a straw poll with Eagle Forum. I had the backing of conservative groups. But again, I was endorsed by Conservative Party Alabama. A fine guy named Richard Rutledge runs it. And I was expecting something to somebody to say something that I just knew was not true. And a story was run in a media outlet in Alabama that said that Conservative Party Alabama had pulled its endorsement of Brent Woodall. They never bothered to call me. They never bothered to call Richard Rutledge. They never bothered to confirm it at all. They just ran with it. It really did not sit well, as you can imagine, with me, and it really did not sit well with Richard. I am expecting something like that again, but Brandon, the thing about it, and the last time I jokingly, before I got in the race, I was trying to figure out what was going to be said about Brent Woodall. And I jokingly said, they're probably going to come out and say I was on the grassy knoll in '63. And I was going to, be able to produce my birth certificate and say I wasn't even born in '63. I couldn't have been there in Dallas, Texas back then. But I cannot anticipate what they're going to say or what they're going to make up. And by them, I'm talking about that particular media group now. But I can't worry about that kind of stuff. I've just got to respond when it happens. And I am not, I'm not attacking any of the utility companies. I'm saying that what takes place both in the hidden tax that exists at the Public Service Commission, that is wrong. And also the fact that we have a commissioner who doesn't think that the Public Service Commission does anything and doesn't bother to do any work enough to even know what goes on there. Those are the issues I'm running on. And is it possible somebody's going to come up and say something that's completely false next time like they did last time? Sure. But all I can do is, worry about me and hold myself to the standards that I live my life by every day. I am a longtime conservative. Years ago, I was the chairman of the Morgan County Young Republicans back when I was a young Republican. Back in 2016, I was a delegate for President Trump at the Republican National Convention. back in the 1990s for about a year and 2 weeks. My wife told me I could do talk radio for a year, and I held it almost exactly a year. But I was given an opportunity to be a conservative radio host. I did that for, like I said, for right at a year in North Alabama. I did two-hour programs, 5 days a week, one from 6 to 8 in the morning, one from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Then on Saturday mornings, we had a show called The Week in Review. That was an hour and a half where I was on there as a conservative, talking about the current issues, the political issues, the cultural issues. And then on Sunday nights for about, I don't know, it's about 5 years total in North Alabama on Channel 19, WHNT. I was the conservative co-host of a program called Talkback. And it was, like just a call-in television program, but we talked about the hot current political, social, cultural issues of the day. I have been, again, a conservative for a long, long time. I'm not a liberal, and I don't care what they say, but I can't control what they say. All I can control is what I do.
Mr. Woodall, last time I got some forensic documents that revealed that Commissioner Oden and Montgomery political operative Tim Witt had used computers to falsify paperwork that you had did with the Alabama Secretary of State's office. You mentioned a while ago about the standards that you live by. What do you think that says about Commissioner Oden, him being supposed to be a man of faith and leads his congregation?
Well, he'll have to answer for that, not me. But Chris, I got to tell you, I hadn't forgotten about that. Haven't thought about that in a while, though. But you're right. What you got a hold of showed that my opponent, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it showed that my opponent sat down and produced that document. Basically, I was completely bogus, and then sent it to his political advisor. Is that right? Who then edited that document, and it was sent around the state saying that I don't remember what it was. Supposedly I had done something or hadn't done something I was supposed to do. And, but I answer for myself, and I would hope that the voters would keep that kind of stuff in mind. I also would hope, if you'll recall, something else that you revealed was shortly after the runoff. And again, 3 years ago, there were 4 of us in the primary. I came out against, I survived the primary, came out into the runoff with my opponent, who had received only 36% of the vote in the primary, and went basically 52-48 in the final runoff, missed it by a little bit. But again, I gave it everything I had and stuck by my principles. But I'll just put it this way again, he's going to have to answer for what he's done. But shortly after that runoff, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Public Service Commission, they didn't raise the rates while the campaign was going on, but right after that, they voted, 2 rate increases shortly after that.
They did. They voted for a rate increase about 2 days after the runoff. They voted for one in August and then another one in November or early December after Commissioner Oden and Commissioner Baker had secured re-election again.
Right, 3 times after that runoff. That in that calendar year, I knew one was shortly after. Actually, I said 2. That's right, because there was one in July, like you said, and one in August. But they're not going to be. They won't rate. I mean, my prediction here, I'm not expecting them to raise rates between now and the election next year, so they can say they're keeping them low. They can't say they're fighting Biden anymore. I don't know what they're going to say. I guess they're going to say we're working with President Trump now. But that's just that. I guess that's kind of what I expect about how things are going to go.
But with the statute that creates the PSC, my understanding is that, since we have regulated monopolies, that's what the utilities are. I mean, you can't really have 3 power companies on the same power pole.
Right.
They're guaranteed a profit. So if their cost, mainly their fuel cost, goes up, doesn't the PSC really have no choice if those numbers in front of them are honest numbers, but to raise the rate?
Well, what they have the ability to do, Brandon, is to look at, you said that they can look at the numbers that are presented. And once I'm in that position, I'm going to do that. But the first thing I'm going to do is to get rid of this hidden tax. That's going to be my focus until I get that accomplished. And then I will look at the rest of the things that cause the rates to be where they are.
Mr. Woodall, talking about the TVA a while ago in North Alabama and this, the monies that go up there. Don't quote me on this because I may be wrong, but if you go back, if you took out North Alabama, that was some of Jeremy Oden's strongholds, all of Twinkle Cavanaugh's strongholds. Should they not be allowed to vote in this PSC races since they're not being affected by this?
Well, they are statewide offices, and so they should be allowed to vote, but they, again, need to know what's going on. And that is what I consider to be my job, to letting people know exactly what's going on at the Public Service Commission down in Montgomery. Even though they may not be affected by the TVA aspect of it, as I mentioned earlier, there are some different companies that are also regulated by the Public Service Commission, including some much smaller things that we may not even think about. I mean, the trucking industry. Let's go over the railroad industry. I mean, the PSC was started back in the 1800s as the Railroad Commission, and it morphed into the PSC over time. And so, these people, they may not get their utilities from a company regulated by the PSC, but there's a good chance that they are affected by it.
I know one of the things the PSC regulates are gas pipelines.
Yes, sir.
I know some people have had issues with the gas pipelines in the past. Are we doing a good enough job in making sure that those pipelines are safe and secure and that they're not like a health and safety risk for anyone?
Well, they were doing a really good job when I was at the PSC, and I'll tell you how I remember that. At the time, a few months before I left and went into private legal practice, they were replacing the gas pipelines in the Montgomery area. And people didn't realize this, but back decades ago, when they put those pipelines in certain cities like Montgomery, for instance, they put cast iron pipelines in the ground. And people at the time thought, that's cast iron, it's going to last forever. Well, they lasted a long time, but they got old, they became brittle, they started to crack. And so it became imperative that they were replaced, and they did that. The natural gas companies regulated by the PSC did a really good job of getting that situation handled. There for a while, we were writing a column. I think it was called the Commissioner's Corner. Is what I came up with the idea, and we on one occasion we wrote an article about those pipelines, about the gas pipelines and the need to have them replaced and what was being done for safety's sake. And I will tell you this, it got the natural gas company saw it, got their attention and called. And I said, no, let me tell you, I said, you're doing what you have to do. You're doing what is necessary. You're doing it in a timely fashion. And they were keeping the Public Service Commission updated. Yes, that's how I remember that so well, because I did a little bit of research into the issue at that time before we did the article, and we did get attention with it, which was kind of the goal of writing that article.
Mr. Wall, do you think that the Public Service Commission should be, or some kind of amendment should take place where they're limited to 2 terms, like constitutional offices, so they're not constantly, doing things to run for election?
Well, I tell you what I truly at my heart believe is that my opponent needs to be term limited by the people of the state of Alabama next year. They just need to say, look, enough of you. 14, by this time around, it's going to be 14 years. You're not doing your job. You're not going to Montgomery. You don't even know what goes on there when you're there. Enough of you. We're not going to return you to that office. That's what needs to happen. We just need to have the people of Alabama vote him out.
I know with the solar farms, and there's some opposition here in Montgomery to the solar farms. Does the PSC have a role in approving or disapproving the siting of a solar farm? Or, is that just kind of left up to the local zoning boards, if they have any, and the utilities?
Yeah, the utility company is going to basically advise the Public Service Commission about the balance of energy production that they have. But for the most part, that's going to be something more on the local level. The PSC is not going to go to the utility and say, you have to put a solar farm in Lee County or in Marion County. But as far as they do get up there, and there's a nuclear power plant down just outside Dothan at Farley. You've got this balance of the energy production that takes place there, and they're going to update the PSC and keep them apprised as to what that balance is. But as far as telling them you're going to put it in a certain county or certain location, they're not going to tell them they have to do that.
Well, talking about those power plants, we've seen that Alabama Power has polluted our rivers. There's one called I think the Coosas. I think they call it the Amazon, America's Amazon. I forgot how many ton lagoon down there with coal ash. Is that the Public Service Commission's job to keep them in check to stop that? I mean, I know you're going to be branded a liberal environmentalist for saying that, but they shouldn't be allowed to just destroy our resources like that, should they?
Well, I'll tell you how that's going to end up getting to the PSC. The EPA may come in and say, you got to clean this up. You're going to have to do this and make that happen. When that occurs, that means that the utility commission or utility is going to incur greater expenses that have to be reported to the PSC. And then the commissioners have to look at that and try to balance out what they're going to do with rates in light of that.
Keeping along that same lines, I know the Biden administration was reversing what the previous administration had done with the coal ash. I think, many of these old coal burning plants that a lot of them have been retired, but, as a byproduct of burning tons and tons of coal is you get ash.
Right.
And, I think they went into ponds, which were site built, on some of these sites, and they filled them up and then covered them over. And the Biden administration, which reversed what I think the previous Trump administration had done, and said that, no, you have to remove that ash because of, possible, I guess, heavy metal contamination or mercury from those sites. And I think we may go back with the Trump administration and reverse that again, where no, you can leave them where you're at. Is this an area where the PSC has any regulatory authority at all, or is it pretty much you're just waiting for the federal government to make up their mind as to what the rule is?
Well, you'll remember a few minutes ago, I said one of the things that they would say said was, we're fighting Biden, and Biden didn't have a clue who they were. They can't overrule anything from the EPA, period. I mean, that's political grandstanding when they would do that. But again, it's something that the utility companies do have as an expense to look at, and they apprise, their books are basically open to the Public Service Commission. The team in the Electricity Policy Division can go through, see all of their expenses, talk to the commissioners about what they have found, and again, that helps the commissioners, or should help the commissioners, make decisions about their votes.
Well, we've seen last time with Commissioner Oden with probably the stupidest ad I've ever seen about toting Oden. And then we seen Commissioner Kavanaugh this time about her place card. One of them on there said, you know, she's protecting our Western Christian values, which I don't even know what the hell that means. I mean, is there a way to counteract that to get the voters to focus on what they're not talking about? I mean, I don't know if I'm asking
Well,
that question
in
right.
hindsight, in hindsight, I wish that I had challenged my opponent to a target shooting contest. Maybe that would have let people have known, you know, who really could shoot the best. But I did a radio interview in Birmingham last time, and the first question that the gentleman asked me was, "What does carrying guns have to do with the work at the Public Service Commission?" And I said, absolutely nothing. You know, I'm a trial lawyer. I love conducting trials. And one of the things as a prosecutor that I like to tell the juries in closing argument or in rebuttal following the defense presentation is, you know, folks, that's what you call an old magician's trick. When the defense attorney, you know, stands up and says, "Hey, what about this? Forget about what the defendant did. Let's talk about this over here." I tell the juries, remember what the magician, he's gonna start waving this hand and get you to look here. And while you're looking over here, he's fixing to pull a rabbit out of thin air with this hand that you're not looking at. That's all that is. That is a complete distraction to avoid talking about the real issues that have a real effect on the real ratepayers of these utilities. That is to avoid saying, I don't even think the Public Service Commission does anything, or to address that you have said that. That is to avoid saying, yeah, I support you paying this tax, this hidden tax. We talked, this was in Scottsboro when I was running the last time. And my opponent went first. I think they went in alphabetical order this evening, but it was at a Republican meeting over there. I followed him and I talked all about the hidden tax. And when I finished, this lady, the meeting had wrapped up, this lady walked over me. She said, he just sat there and took that. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, he didn't say anything about it. I said, no, ma'am. I said, and she said, why not? I said, he can't. And she looked at me like, what do you mean? And I said, he has two choices. One, he can say, Woodall is exactly right about what he's telling you. If that happens, he's basically saying, I'm incompetent. I don't know what I'm doing. You ought to vote for Woodall. Or he could say, no, that's not true. And then I get to show you the truth and tell you, go to their annual report and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And then you'll find out that if he had said, no, that's not true, you'd find out that what he told you is completely wrong and you shouldn't vote for him and shouldn't trust. So what they're doing is they're just saying, hey, look over here, and trying to distract the voters.
I know we have the nuclear plant in Columbia, but I mean, since that was built back in the 70s, you know, the amount of power being pulled by North Alabama versus South Alabama, you know, has increased exponentially. Do we need another nuclear plant like in North Alabama? And is that something the PSC would even be involved in?
Well, I tell you what, Mr. Moseley, gentlemen I go to church with, actually 2 or 3 gentlemen I go to church with, used to work for TVA. One of them is, actually they're all retired, but one of them retired and he is a nuclear energy consultant and goes around to different parts of the country and advises them. We were recently talking about the old Bellefonte plant, if you'll recall. You had the government built that thing. It's sitting there mothballed for decades now. But if it were possible to get that plant back up to code and running again, that would be an issue not for the Public Service Commission, since it would be in the TVA footprint, not in one of the utilities that's regulated by the BCS.State.
Mr. Well, so for the record, you are not a living environmentalist.
I'm sorry.
Okay. for the record, you're not a liberal environmentalist that's out to destroy coal or anything like that.
I'm not a liberal anything. I can assure you, when I was a kid, my dad's aunt and uncle lived out in Coleman County. They lived like it was basically the late 1800s, early 1900s. They had a coal burning furnace in their living room, and they would have, ever so often before winter and maybe once during the winter, they'd have somebody come out and just dump coal out beside their house. I put coal in that furnace before. I was never concerned about what I was breathing from that. Now I'm not a liberal anything. But again, what they're going to say is out of my control. Hey, I need to tell y'all something. I rented this facility till 5:30. I think we're coming up on the.
Yeah, your time's running out here.
Yes,
Yeah,
they may charge me a premium now for this.
That's all the questions I had for you, Brent.
I'm sorry.
That's all the questions I had for you then. I mean, I don't know,
Okay.
Brent had any. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, Brandon, did you have anything else you wanted to?
Is there anything else you would like to add that we haven't really gone over?
I'm sorry?
Is there anything that you would like to add that we really haven't gone over?
No, sir. Y'all don't know how much I appreciate this opportunity. This is a good way to get the message out there. And again, I mean, there, like we've talked about, there are a lot of different moving parts at the Public Service Commission, but I am trying to stay focused on letting people around the state know about this hidden tax. And also at the same time, letting people know that we have a commissioner there who in his own mouth says the PSC doesn't do anything. And I can promise you it will do something when I am there, because I'm going to be there making it happen. That to me is just as important as the hidden tax aspect of this. We had a commissioner, like I said, who did not even know about this money being sent from the Public Service Commission to the general fund. That's just wrong. And again, I mean, if this were a federal employee and Elon Musk had to say he'd be fired, well, I'm asking the people of Alabama to fire him next year when we have a chance in the Republican primary. Thank you so much again for this chance, y'all, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Yes, sir. We'll see y'all later.